Hello there. This is Giselle Benitez, and I just want to share some information with you. This is very, very serious information, okay? I want you to be aware of. You probably heard everything that's going on with the economy, right? The economy, they say it's getting better, is it not getting better, etc. And what I'm going to do is share with you some information that one of my mentors shared with me on Sunday during a webinar, okay? It's a 2-hour webinar. You're gonna find out there what's really going on with the economy right now, with the US dollar, okay? And why you should be aware of this information and some of the things you can start doing, okay? Like, for example, investing in silver and gold. You probably heard out there someone told you, hey, you should start investing your money, silver, gold, etc. But what happens is most of us, right? The average person just hears all this stuff but doesn't really do anything about it, okay? With the following information that you will receive, I want you to kind of get a sense of urgency, okay? For you to start investing your dollars, because I hate to break it to you, but the economy is not getting better, okay? It's not getting better. So, like my mentor says, you hope for the best, okay? Which I am hoping for the best, but you prepare for the worst. That's what the intelligent, smart people, the wealthy people do, okay? They prepare for the worst, you hope for the best. If nothing happens, if the economy gets amazing, then you're fine, okay? But as you probably heard about inflation, right? Most of us don't have a clue what inflation is. It basically is, inflation is what you can buy with your dollar, right? Your purchase power with dollars, okay? For last year, for example, you could buy oil for a certain price. This year is a little bit more, okay? That's inflation, what you can purchase with your dollar. Now, the reason why you should start finding out what's going on with the US dollar, like what really is going on with the US dollar, is because you do not want to be left with a bunch of dollar bills in your bank account if something happens. Why? Because if your purchasing power goes to zero, imagine that, okay? It has happened in other countries already because of the economy, okay? Because the country has gone bankrupt. If you have $1 million in the bank right now, and tomorrow the economy goes into overhaul, bankrupt, and the dollar is worth zero, it doesn't matter that you have $1 million paper bills in your bank account, because you will not be able to buy anything with it. It doesn't matter, right? Because it's not real money. It's paper money. We call it funny money, okay? Funny money, because it's not real money, okay? You might be a little bit confused right now. Do not worry about it. My mentor T. Lamont will explain to you in the next 2 hours exactly what's going on with the economy in very simple terms that even a 10-year-old kid would understand, okay? I personally had no idea what, for example, Forex trading is, okay? I had no idea. After this 2-hour webinar, I do know what Forex trading is right now, and it's very simple to understand. It's not rocket science, okay? So, I want you to subscribe to my channel, leave positive comments, give it a 2 thumbs up, okay? And make sure you get added to my newsletter list, to my email list, because I will be sharing with you updates about what's going on with the economy, ways you can start investing in silver and gold, like what I'm gonna start doing. And if you have any questions, okay, just let me know. But we do have a solution for you if you do want to start investing in silver and gold. Okay, hope you enjoyed the video. Get rid of distractions, get rid of your cell phone unless you're watching on it. Get yourself some popcorn, some coffee, and enjoy the show. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Market. In 1999, I started trading in the stock market. Started off with an account of $2,200 on June 17th. Came from a tax refund. By August the 1st, we had doubled our account from $2,200 to $4,500 based on the training that we had gotten and that we had then begun to execute. We got pretty good at trading in the market, but for the most part, we were good at trading in the market as the market went up. We weren't good at trading in the market at the time when the market went down. March of 2000, something happened. In your questions box, can anyone tell me what happened in March of 2000? Does anybody remember what happened in March of 2000? Anybody know? Ah, yes, the dot-com bubble burst or busted or was popped. In the late 90s, you had these tech companies coming out, and if they had a .com tied to their name, you just threw money at them, and they just went to heaven. Okay. Years prior, the stock market has always been a function of supply and demand, economics, and you have more demand for a stock when that company is making money. So the more the company makes in terms of net profits, then the more valuable that stock becomes. When you're buying stock, you're buying a share, a piece of ownership of that particular company. Well, we had this aberration for a few years where seemingly the rules of money, the rules of the stock market seemingly changed. But there were people like Warren Buffett that were saying, no, it's always a function of earnings, and this is unsustainable, and it's going to come to a halt. There was the Fed chief, the Federal Reserve chairman at the time, Alan Greenspan, who said this is irrational exuberance. And in March of 2000, we saw the bubble burst, and the markets came crashing down. Then we had September 2011, a 9/11. The markets come crashing down. And the overwhelming majority of people that were in the market, the masses, were not prepared. And trillions of dollars, hear my words carefully, weren't lost. Trillions of dollars changed hands. Trillions of dollars weren't lost, but trillions changed hands. They changed hands from the uninformed to the informed. They changed hands from the uninformed to the informed. Okay? Trillions of dollars weren't lost in the stock market. Trillions of dollars changed hands. Now, the result, the net effect, is that millions upon millions of folks lost money, but then a smaller amount of folks on the other side made a bunch of money that got lost because money just changed hands. All right? Now, what we saw after the dot-com bubble being popped is we saw money then begin to move into U.S. real estate. And we had a similar type of irrational exuberance in the U.S. real estate market, where on average you might see 3 to 5% appreciation on a residential property a year. So if you had a house that was valued at $100,000 one year, then maybe the next year it was valued at $103,000, or let's say $5,000. But then we started to see the same type of irrational exuberance. We started to see in places like Las Vegas, Nevada, Baltimore, Maryland, many parts of Florida, and a lot of other places, California. We started seeing properties that should have been priced $100,000, $200,000 properties, and now all of a sudden they were appreciating 30 and 40% a year, as opposed to what the market had typically performed at maybe 3 to 5% per year. my wife and I were doing a building project in Charlotte, North Carolina. And we started building a home. At the same time, while we were building, we actually were part owners of a network marketing company. So we started building this home. And by the time the home was finished, from the contract price we had to the market price at the time that we built it, and the building time frame, this is nice neighborhood, but this is where you would have a builder who would build similar type houses in that neighborhood. Didn't take them long to build it. About a 6 to 8 month piece there. The house appreciated some 10-15%. 10-15% in 8 months. That's crazy. Irrational exuberance. What happened in 2008? What happened in 2008? What happened in 2008? Well, yeah, because it's still impacting people now. We have the real estate bubble. Yeah. We have the real estate bubble. Now, this is what we should know, because many of you are not U.S. citizens, okay? And I'm talking about things that obviously impacted a lot of people in the U.S., but I need us to understand that what happened with the real estate bubble sent seismic global economic shockwaves. You take countries like Iceland. I encourage you at your own leisure to go to Google and Google Iceland bankruptcy. Essentially, the whole country went bankrupt. Iceland, prior to the 2008 real estate bubble bursting and causing almost a collapse of the U.S. banking system, Iceland was considered one of the richest nations, particularly for its size. And almost overnight, seemingly, Iceland now is bankrupt. In the year 2000, I believe it was, Argentina, there's a buddy of mine who was in Argentina when their currency, the Argentinian currency, was debased to virtually nothing. That caused a revolution in that particular country. As a matter of fact, my buddy was actually shot. He was just walking down the street and got shot. Thank goodness it was not fatal. And so I've seen from 2000 the stock market bubble. I did not understand in 2000 that it was a bubble and it was about to burst. I didn't have the knowledge base at the time. Real estate, we started to see, this looks a lot like what I saw in the stock market. Irrational exuberance. This is not sustainable. 30-40% appreciation in property values. That's not sustainable. All of these mortgages, if you can fog a mirror, you can get a mortgage. That's not sustainable. And we saw the huge collapse and the challenge that still presents. There's still people who haven't found employment. There's still folks who are struggling because of what happened in 2008. What gravely concerns me is that there's another bubble, a much larger bubble than the dot-com bubble, a much larger bubble than the real estate bubble. And this is, give me a moment, the funny money bubble. The funny money bubble. The dollar bubble. Now, I want us to understand that what happened in the U.S. in 2008 was felt globally. The funny money bubble. The funny money bubble actually has already been bursting. And let's share that with you. Now, again, I'm not here to scare you. Okay? Give me a moment. But I do want us to be prepared. I pray that if nothing else, you walk away tonight with more intensity in developing income streams, one, and two, that you commit to being wise with the incomes you generate. I could care less about you making money to buy a car. I could care less about you making money to buy some big fancy house. begrudge anyone upgrading a vehicle or upgrading their housing. But I'm not here for shiny stuff. Let's take a look at what's been happening to the U.S. dollar. What's been happening to the U.S. dollar now for decades. Now, I simply went to Google, I put in U.S. dollar, and then I went to Wikipedia. You'll find this about 2/3 of the way down. I've blown this up to make it easier for you to see. And what you're going to see is the purchasing power of a U.S. dollar going all the way back to 1774. This is a fascinating read, and I strongly suggest that you take some time out to read about the U.S. dollar. Well, why about the U.S. dollar, T. Lamont? I'm not in the U.S. The U.S. dollar is the world's reserve currency, and we'll help you understand what that means and why that's a big deal. And for those of you in the U.S., why it's going to be a big deal when the U.S. dollar is no longer the only reserved world's reserve currency. It will have a major impact on you in the U.S. It will impact everyone across the globe, and I want us to be prepared whether you are in the U.S. or outside of the U.S. Okay, let's take a look at the U.S. dollar. So back in 1774, a dollar bought a dollar worth of goods and services. A dollar bought a dollar worth of goods and services. Now, there were some turbulent times in the 1700s, in the 1800s. Of course, the U.S. Has a very, 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 very dark past, whether it is dealing with the Native Americans, whether it is dealing with Africans, or what have you, whether it was the rights not extended to women, a very, very dark past. So some very turbulent times. We see in the 1800s, for instance, there's still slavery. Then there is the abolition of slavery. But then there is the Reconstruction. And there's all this stuff. There's civil wars. A lot of turbulent times. And so you saw the dollar would lose steam in terms of its purchasing power. But it would rebound. So from 1774, a dollar bought a dollar's worth of stuff. Then, wow, that dollar's not that strong now. Buys 59 cents worth of stuff, but it rebounded in 1790. And it went through some turbulent times. Again, civil wars and all this other stuff. But by 1850, hey, that dollar buys even more stuff. The dollar is more powerful. By 1900, the dollar had about 96 cents worth of purchasing power. So with all of the stuff, over 100 plus years of stuff, the dollar maintain its power. One of the reasons was they didn't just print money at will. Money was backed by something. As a matter of fact, this funny money, this paper money, was backed by real money. What's been real money for the history of mankind? Gold, silver, perhaps other precious metals. Okay, obviously there have been cultures and still cultures today that might look at things like cattle or might look at livestock or what have you. It's only been in recent times, no, it's been our lifetime, but it's only been in recent time that this paper money has been so valuable in the marketplace. But could it be an illusion like we saw with the dot-coms? Could it be an illusion like we saw with real estate? Now, we start to see in the 1920s, as the country, U.S., goes through the Great Depression, the dollar really gets banged up. Now, prior to 1920, for every U.S. dollar printed, there had to be a certain amount of gold held in reserves. You couldn't print the money unless you had a certain amount of gold. Well, in the 20s, what started to happen is the U.S. started printing more money than what they actually had in gold reserves. They still had gold reserves, but they actually started printing more money than what they had in gold. All right, so before the 1920s, it would be like you and I writing a check. If you write a $100 check, you need to have what? $100 in the bank. By the 1920s, the U.S. started doing something. They still had $100 in the checking account, but maybe they were writing a $120 check or a $130 check. Now, if you and I do that, we might get by with that for a little while if the person we wrote the check to didn't deposit the check right away. But at some point, the day of reckoning is going to happen. Because when they deposit the check, if we don't have enough to cover that check, it's going to be insufficient funds. Now, after World War II, the U.S. dollar became the world's reserve currency, I think replacing the Great British Pound. I could be wrong on that, but I think they replaced the Great British Pound. Now, what does that mean? What that meant is it gave the dollar tremendous power, tremendous standing. You see, since the U.S. dollar is the world's reserve currency, what that means is that any major transactions that happens globally, let's say you are in Asia, some part of Asia, and you want to purchase oil from the Middle East, that transaction is settled, hear me, in U.S. dollars. So a country in Asia is buying oil from the Saudis, let's say, that transaction is being settled in U.S. dollars. In Chile, they're doing trade with Australia. Well, that trade is being settled in U.S. dollars. Now, Economics 101. Economics 101. Economics 101 is supply and demand. And it goes like this. When you have high demand and limited supply, what happens to the cost of that product or service or the value of that product or service? You tell me in your questions box. You've got high demand and limited supply. You've got high demand and limited supply. Yeah, it goes up. The value of that product or service goes up. What you can sell that product or service for in the marketplace goes up. Why? You've got a lot of demand and you've got limited supply. Now, what happens when you have huge supply and lowering demand? What happens to the value of that product or service? It goes down. It goes down. Okay, so now, here's what happened. Here's what happened. You had the U.S. dollar, and someone corrected me. I believe they said it was the sterling that was the reserve currency prior to the U.S. dollar. So you had the U.S. dollar being the reserve currency. The reserve currency means that when countries are doing trade with each other, they settle those transactions in U.S. dollars. A bunch of U.S. dollars out there, high demand. So you have these countries that want to have U.S. dollars. Why? They need U.S. dollars to transact business. Okay. Now, high demand, at one point limited supply, because after World War II, there was this conference that they had, and they set the U.S. dollars being the reserve currency tied to gold. And I believe it was, gold was priced at, I believe, 35 U.S. dollars for an ounce of gold. And so the U.S. was to hold gold. So this way, when a country was doing commerce transactions, instead of that country having to send gold, instead of having to send gold from Chile to Australia because Chile is doing business with Australia, or instead of having to send gold from Japan to Saudi Arabia because maybe Japan is buying some oil from Saudi Arabia, all they had to do was exchange U.S. dollars. It was much easier to exchange U.S. dollars than it was to send gold back and forth and forth and back. Now, what the U.S. was supposed to do is the U.S. was supposed to tie its dollar to the amount of gold in reserves. Well, France in the 60s started to become very concerned and had a few other countries that were also very concerned about the fact that the U.S. policies back in the 60s, that there was deficit spending and debt was mounting up. And France, among others, said, wait a minute, I don't know if these dudes over here in the U.S. are going to have the gold. So I don't want just the cash. I want my gold. See, I'm holding these U.S. dollars, but I'm supposed to be able to redeem these U.S. dollars for gold. And so over a period of just a few short years, more than 50% of the U.S. gold reserves were depleted because countries simply asked for what they should have gotten, what was rightfully theirs. So now in 1971, President Nixon then does has his address and basically tells the world, forget y'all. That might have not have been the real F word he used, but my mama might be on the webinar. He said, we're no longer in the U.S., we're no longer going to tie our dollar to gold. We're going to unpeg ourselves from gold. And don't worry about the gold. You can just use the dollars. And ladies and gentlemen, this is when funny money began in earnest. Let's go back and look at this chart. Let's go back and look at this chart. Give me a moment. I want you to notice how the U.S. dollar, as it got beaten up, even back here in the 20s, that it was resilient. It started to bounce back in terms of its relative purchasing power. Bounced back in the 1940s. But then when we hit the 50s, remember in the 1920s, the U.S. started writing checks that it didn't have the full amount to cover for. And by 1971, it just started writing checks. It just started writing checks. If you and I do this, we go to jail. You and I do this kind of stuff, we go to jail. Okay? All right. Look at how, since the 1950s, how the dollar has never rebounded. And now the same dollar in 2012 has a relative purchasing power of 3 cents. What does this mean? What does this mean? It means you've got to have a lot more dollars to buy the same stuff. Give me a moment. I want to pull up a chart here. Give me a moment. Let's go back 100 years, okay? If you purchased an item in 1913 and that item cost you $100, then by 2013, you needed $2,351 to buy the same item that cost you $100 100 years earlier. That's what we mean by diminishing purchasing power. The dollar looks the same. It still has George on there, or Abe on there, or Ulysses on there, or Ben on there for a $100 bill. But it requires a lot more to buy the same stuff. Now, let me show you something else here. You cannot trust you can't unfortunately you can't trust your government, you can't trust the media. Let me tell you, let me bring this into clear focus here. Here we go. This is a chart that talks about the consumer price index. I learned this when I was trading very actively, and I'm trading actively again in the stock market. But when I first started learning about the stock market in the late 90s and into 2000, when I was watching CNBC 8 hours a day, they would often report about the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, which is a measure, supposedly, of inflation. How much more does it cost you to buy a loaf of bread today than it did this time last year? How much more does it cost you to get a gallon of gas today than it did this time last year? How much more does it cost you to buy groceries or what have you than it did this time last year? Okay. Now, if you look at this chart, they would have you to believe that inflation is fairly tame. Oh, inflation is less than 5%. So an item that cost me $100 last year may cost me $103 or $104 this year. Oh, that's not that bad. Inflation is tame. They lied. This is an outright lie. I challenge you to maybe check out business news from time to time. Let's say it's CNBC. What I learned is that when they report these CPI numbers, guess what they take out of the numbers? When they report CPI, Consumer Price Index, which is supposedly a measure of inflation, guess what two major items they neglect to report in their numbers? Someone tell me, what do you think? What two major items that impact all of us do they not put in their numbers? You've got it, Albert. Albert said they don't put in food and they don't put in energy. Wait a minute, let's think this through. Outside of housing costs, what are some of your biggest expenses? I've got a family of 5. You already know what one of my biggest expenses is. Food. I've got 2 teenage sons. My youngest son can, my gosh. Food and energy. Gas is energy. Your electric bill, that's energy. If you have propane gas or a gas bill, that's energy. They do not report in their annual or in their inflation figures go without food. Go without food. How long will you go? Good people will do bad things to make sure their children are fed. Go without energy. Go without gas. Go without utilities. But that's what they report as, hey, inflation is tame. See, if they told the real story, it would cause alarm. Maybe people wouldn't stand for what people stand for now. So we've got a looming crisis, and I believe it is so much bigger than what we saw, unfortunately, in 2008. I'm not doing this to scare you, but I do want to alarm you. I do want you to be sober. I don't want you to be in a stupor. So I'm not surprised that now you've got a couple of states that say, hey, yeah, you can go on and get high. Let's dumb down you folks. Let's get you all high. Get you on some marijuana. Let's get you high, feeling good while the country's going bankrupt. There'll be other states that will say, hey, let them smoke the stuff. Let them feel good. Let them feel good while trillions of dollars don't get lost, but change hands. All right. Let's talk about some things that happened earlier this year. Got very little publicity in the U.S. I was out of the country. I was not in the U.S. when this happened. I was in Chile, I believe, or maybe the Dominican Republic. But I was traveling, I believe, when I first heard the news. But I would tune in to CNN to see or Fox News to see if they were going to report. And there was very little reporting on this, just a little bit. A little tiny country called Cyprus, part of the European Union, and Cyprus needed to be bailed out. Country completely bankrupt. Okay, country completely bankrupt. They needed to be bailed out, so they go to the European Union, bail us out. Well, in order to be bailed out, they had to come back with some proposals. The first proposal they had was that they were going to essentially levy every bank account that was held in Cyprus. So if you had an account, if you had $2 in your account, you were going to get a levy. Basically, they were going to steal money from you. Now, that was against policies of the European Union, and so they came back with saying, if you have more than 100,000 euros, we're going to levy your account. I'm told there were people that had over 100,000 euros in their account that saw as much as 40% of the overage gone from their bank account. So imagine if you had 200,000, whatever your currency happens to be. Imagine if you had $200,000 in your bank account, okay? Whatever your currency happens to be. And everything above 100,000 What if they just went in and took 40% of that? And I'm told that one of the banks there, that's exactly what happened. And so now you were down $40,000 and you could do nothing about it. So your 200,000 was now 160 and you could do nothing about it. And not only that, but then they instituted some capital controls. Which said that you could only access a certain amount of money per day. So even if you still had 160,000 left after the $40,000 robbery, I don't know what that number is now, but I remember early on those capital controls were something like 200 euros. Let's say if those were in dollar terms, it might be like 260 bucks. So what if you had an account that had $200,000 in it? They basically raped your account of $40,000. You had no say-so in that. And then they said, of your 160 that remains, you can only get about 260 bucks a day. That's what happened in Cyprus. Now, my numbers may be off just a little bit, but it's the concept that I want you to get. The concept is they stole money from the people, from their bank accounts, and then they limited the amount of money that people could withdraw. Now, I want you to let that sink in. Let that sink in. Now, let me tell you, I was very interested to see the reaction. And I'm not advocating, nor would I ever advocate violence. But I was very curious to see what the people's reaction was. Because I figured there were other countries that are broke that were really paying attention, using that maybe as a case study. What would happen? See, if you do that, and all of a sudden there's a major revolution in the streets and some politicians are no longer there, and I'm not advocating that, I'm not advocating violence, then maybe you think twice if you're another country. But if you do that, and all that really happens is an uproar in the streets, but it's pretty tame, wasn't very violent. Politicians are still alive. Again, I'm not advocating any violence. Maybe I think there was a bank, that there was a fire in the bank, and there might have been a couple of lives, unfortunately, that were lost. But it wasn't the mass rioting, mass loss of life that you could expect from a situation like that. Obviously, in the United States, where I hail from originally, we've seen people killed for far less than that, okay? Again, not advocating violence. But I was curious to see that since there was so little of it, would that cause other nations that are also broke to look at that model? Cyprus got away with it. Took the people's money, limited how much money they could have access to. What concerns me about the U.S. is, and this is not a political statement, what concerns me about the U.S. is the word is that as little as 30%, maybe as high as 40+% of U.S. citizens are receiving some type of food assistance. Now, it used to be when I was a kid, I used to work at a grocery store. And at the grocery store, I was 15. That was my first job was sweeping hair up at the barbershop. But my first job where I actually got a paycheck where they took taxes out of was working at the grocery store. And at that time, if somebody was on food assistance, they had this book of stamps, food stamps. And people knew, oh, okay, this person's got food stamps. Well, now they've done it in such a way that you got the food programs are on a card. It looks like a debit card, looks like a credit card. So people aren't embarrassed about it. I read something the other day that suggested that if you took all of the Walmarts in the U.S. and you lined up everyone in the U.S. that was getting food assistance from the government, that every single Walmart in the U.S. would have a line at least 2 miles long. That concerns me. That greatly concerns me. The U.S. is broke. Absolutely broke. They've been broke for a long time. And remember this supply and demand? At one point, tremendous demand for U.S. dollars all across the globe because that was the only way that you could settle transactions. But there was limited supply. There was limited supply at one point in time before Nixon did what he did. Well, now you've got huge supply of money. And since the 2008 crisis, they've been flooding, even before then, but since the crisis, they've been flooding the market with more and more and more supply. But let me tell you what's happening. There is a lowering of demand. Countries have been getting together and having meetings without the U.S. present, saying we are too dependent on the U.S. They can't get their act together. Look at what just happened, a government shutdown again. Okay? We need to come up with other currency solutions. China's been talked about. As a matter of fact, there are countries now that are starting to do business, and they're not doing it in U.S. dollars anymore. They're doing it with, I forget what the Chinese, I know it starts with a R. They're doing it with the Chinese currency. Chances are we will see in the upcoming years either maybe not an outright replacement of the U.S. dollar as being the reserve currency, but maybe some other type of currency standing alongside the U.S. dollar. Either way, we're already starting to see countries that are starting to do business in something other than U.S. dollars. So what we have is we've got huge supply, but the demand for U.S. dollars is starting to be lowered because other currency options are being introduced or talked about. Okay? Now, so we've got a challenge for those of you in the U.S. You've got, what is it, $17 trillion in debt now? You've got the thing that has propped up the economy. One of the things is the fact that it's been the reserve currency and countries have settled transactions in U.S. dollars. We're already starting to see that some countries are starting to move away from that. Ladies and gentlemen, there were ample signs that the dot-com bubble was about to burst. But if you were not informed, you were not aware, and perhaps you were like me, caught on the bad side of that. There were ample signs that the real estate bubble was not sustainable. And unfortunately, that sent just seismic waves throughout the global economic community. What's been happening in the U.S., and the reason I keep harping on the U.S. is because it's the reserve currency, is not sustainable. I don't know what's going to happen. I do know this, that there were some news reports that came out. You probably won't hear much about this in your traditional media. There were some news reports that came out a couple of weeks ago about one of the biggest banks in the U.S., Chase Manhattan, and that they were implementing some new policies. A lot of their bank holders, business account holders, got letters basically saying that as of November 17th, that they were going to be limited. These are business accounts, not personal accounts. They were going to be limited to $50,000 in cash transactions. What does that mean? Well, if you have a business, this is my understanding of the information that I've read and looked at, that if you have a business and maybe you had someone that paid you with a cashier's check, paid you with a money order, or you went and got a money order as the business owner or a cashier's check, that's considered a cash transaction. If you have a business where maybe you have a small retail business and you collect cash and you deposit cash into your bank account, that's a cash transaction. Well, these business accounts were going to be limited to $50,000 a month in cash transactions. Ladies and gentlemen, for a small business, that is a killer. The letter also said that international wiring, as of November 17th, was a no-no. So here you are, you're a small business owner in the U.S. You're now limited to $50,000 in cash transactions. So here you have a store, you've got a mom and pop operation. People come, they buy stuff in cash. You take the cash to go deposit it. That goes against your $50,000. You receive a money order. That's considered a cash transaction. A cashier's check. That's considered a transaction. You hire someone offshore, not in the U.S. You hire someone from India. You hire someone from Asia. You hire someone to help you with web design or SEO or what have you to get a bigger internet presence. You want to pay them, and you're used to wiring them funds. Or you have a small mom and pop operation, but you bring in goods. Maybe you have a supplier out of China. You've got a supplier out of India because you can buy the goods there cheaper. You bring it in and you wire the money to your supplier in China or India or wherever that person may be. And they're saying no outgoing international wires. You can have incoming wires. People can send you money internationally, but you can't send the money out. That sounds like control to me. You limit the amount of transactions I can do. You limit my ability to do business internationally. What's next? What's next? What's next? I don't know. Now, of course, Chase Manhattan has come back and said, no. What we're doing is we're using this so that we can have people that have business accounts to upgrade to a preferred business account. And when they upgrade to a preferred business account, then they can do more cash transactions. Then they can do some international wiring. To be honest with you, I don't know what it takes to do that upgrading. And if mom and pop will have the revenues, will be doing the business that is required to do the upgrading. But ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you what happened to me. My wife and I had come back from Chile, and we were banking. We had a couple of different banking relationships in the U.S., and we had an invoice come in that we needed to pay internationally. Now, this is a company that we've done business with. They've done some consulting on our behalf, and so we've sent wires multiple times. And this was a banking relationship that I had for quite some time. And we had moved decent amounts of monies because we've done very well in the industry over the past few years. So we had moved decent amounts of monies in and out of the account, domestically and internationally, so on and so forth. And I was sending a wire to cover an invoice. And I think I sent the wire on a Thursday. Well, everything supposedly, looks like it goes through at the bank. On the Monday, I checked my online account, and it was interesting because the money that I sent for the wire had not been deducted from my account. It had been deducted initially, but the money was sitting back there. The wire was returned, and I couldn't figure that out because I've sent that same wire on multiple occasions. I go into the bank. I go in with my oldest son. And we were already in the process of making a hiatus, okay? And the manager says, Mr. Silver, I need to let you know that the bank reserves the right to close an account at any time for any reason. Well, why are you telling me that? What do you mean? Well, your account has been closed. You'll have 14 days to move your monies. You cannot wire internationally. You cannot write any checks. Your debit card has been suspended. Now, that really ticked me off because I had just gotten back into the country. So what if when I was out of the country, I needed access to my debit card? They did this without telling me anything. The letter, the official letter that my account was going to be closed, came a week after they had already disabled the debit card. Think about that, ladies and gentlemen. And this is, again, this is me doing the same business I had been doing for years. I don't know that my son has ever seen me as upset as he saw me then. And I told him, you see, this is why we're getting the heck out of Dodge. This is why. He who controls the money controls the people. Now, again, you may find as you go and you look up Chase Manhattan capital controls, maybe you put that in, you'll find various reports out there. You'll find some reports that Chase is saying, no, it's not that bad. No, it's not that bad. Ladies and gentlemen, we already know that there were no weapons, were there? There were no weapons. How many thousands of lives were lost and there were no weapons? How many thousands of people's, how many thousands of families, the course of the family thrown off, and they lied. CPI, they lie. They lie. You can't trust what you see in the major media markets. Because how many of us really understood what happened in Cyprus by watching CNBC or CNN or Fox News? How many of us really understood what happened in Cyprus? They stole people's money for a bailout. They stole people's money. Now, you think the politicians fared okay? Oh, what happened with this government shutdown? Did the politicians still get paid? Huh. Okay, so in light of this, what do we do? Let's give you some ideas. And a lot of these things you're going to have to begin to research on your own. I am going to give you a resource that I have used. There's a gentleman, I don't believe this is his real name. I don't care because his information is very solid. Online, if you look up Simon Black, he's got a newsletter service called Sovereign Man. Called Sovereign Man Confidential. Now, you can get access to some of his material absolutely free. If you want more in-depth information, then there's a subscription. I don't remember what that outlay is. It is well worth the outlay. If you don't have the resources for the Sovereign Man Confidential now, make your money through your listing business, building your DSD affiliate business. But this is something you certainly want to consider. There's no affiliate piece there, so I'm not making any money on that. I believe Simon Black, of a lot of publications that I've looked at, offers a balanced approach to things that you and I can begin doing to protect our families. And while he alerts us and while he wants us sober, he's not a fear-mongerer. Now, here's some things that we've got to consider, that I want us to consider doing. Number one, we've got to build our business. We've got to build our business with fervor and with a sense of extreme urgency. Now, there are some folks who would have you to believe that the U.S. dollar is going to tank tomorrow. I'm not one of those people. The U.S. dollar has actually been tanking since the 1920s. But I don't believe that the U.S. dollar is going to be replaced tomorrow. It is still interwoven into the fabric of the global economic community. And while there are countries that are saying, hey, we need to look for alternatives to the U.S. dollar, to simply replace the dollar tomorrow would probably not happen. That would really upset the global economic community. So I do believe that we could have, over the next few years, a dollar, if it's not a dollar replacement, another currency or another form of how countries can do trade that do not include the U.S. dollar. Okay? We need to build our business with a sense of urgency. Not so that we can say, oh, I got a nice shiny car, or I got this really big mansion type house, but so that we can protect our families. Now, as you're building this income, I would keep as little in the banks as possible. I would not keep a lot of my money in banks. I don't trust them. Look at what happened to Cyprus. I don't trust Chase Manhattan. My own bank said, hey, you're gone. And they never gave me a reason. I never got a reason. They just shut my account. I never got a reason. Why are you shutting my account down? Is it because I'm sending out international? What? No, they didn't say. They didn't say. By the way, banks now are under a mandate to report if they think that something is suspicious. Well, if you're doing business, if all of a sudden you start doing business and you start making good money where maybe you weren't making as much money before, well, is that considered suspicious because now all of a sudden your bank account is growing? I would keep as little in banks as possible. I would also look at international banking. Now, this is getting harder and harder and harder. I remember, I think it was 2-3 years ago, an asset protection attorney that we've introduced our audience to in times past, Attorney Frank Buck. Attorney Buck said, Tilawat, you need to start considering some offshore banking. He said, as Simon Black says, you don't want to have all of your wealth in the same country in which you reside. Because if your country changes the game plan on you, okay, and everything you have is in the country where you reside, and things go bad in that country, you're in trouble. Argentina. One day, you're in Argentina. You are a millionaire by Argentinian standards. All of your wealth is in Argentina. You wake up, and the Argentinian money the currency has been completely debased. You're broke like everybody else. You're broke like everybody else. Look at international banking. Now, I will tell you again, this is getting harder and harder and harder. So this is something I would do quickly. It's getting more and more difficult if you are a U.S. citizen to open up banking relationships outside of the U.S. A lot of countries won't even accept a U.S. clients anymore. But through Simon Black's service, you'll find some banking relationships and some jurisdictions that you may want to consider where the countries are solvent. The countries have strong financial backing. The likelihood of the country going insolvent and doing something like a Cyprus is much, much less. Countries like Singapore, there's a little small country called Georgia, Australia, Cook Islands, is getting more and more difficult. So this is something I would start investigating immediately. Okay, so start looking at some international banking. Number 4, start a currency conversion from funny money to real money, being either gold or silver or both. Start a currency conversion. So as you generate funny money, okay, I want to help you generate funny money, I say funny money, cash, in your DSD listing business, in your DSD affiliate network, in the other couple of streams that you will come to know and begin to employ with Networkers for Wealth. But as we generate these cash, now obviously in most societies, you're not doing commerce in gold and silver. It still requires cash. So you use the cash to cover your monthly expenses. This is one of the reasons why we want to generate multiple streams of full-time income. So let's say you've got one stream of full-time income coming in now. All right? You use that cash to cover your monthly expenses that are paid for by what? Cash. But now you've got additional financial resources so that you can start converting depreciating cash. You know, you go to most any accountant, they're going to tell you that cash is an asset. No, it's not. No, it's not. No, it's not. All we've got to do is look at this. Cash is not an asset, ladies and gentlemen. It's a depreciating asset at best. What has proven to be an asset is real money, silver and gold. Silver and gold. Now, I'm partial to silver because I don't have time to cover this in great detail, but silver has actually outperformed gold. Either silver or gold, both of them are used as a hedge against inflation, a hedge against a falling funny money system. So what happens is, as funny money loses value, real money tends to go up. And I don't have time to show you the charts of the last 5 years or the last 10 years, but they're impressive to see what silver has done, to see what gold has done. In 2005, I was at a foreign exchange workshop out in Los Angeles, California. The gentleman who was training on this workshop was a Canadian citizen. And he told us, it was about 40 or 50 of us, most of us were U.S. citizens. He told us then, he said, you guys need to start converting into silver and gold. At the time, gold prices were in the $400 an ounce range. He said the U.S. fiscal situation is unsustainable, and the day's going to come when the U.S. will no longer be the only reserve currency. Well, I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. Oh my gosh, that boy, after these weeks, still has those golden, silky vocals. Don't know how free you are in the U.S. anymore. This is why I'm no longer there. But I was arrogant. I was an arrogant American. Who's this Canadian? No, God bless America. We're the greatest nation on earth. And what he said was, your debt is unsustainable. This was before the 2008 crisis, okay? This is before all the trillions of dollars now that have been manufactured out of thin air with nothing backing it up. He said the U.S. dollar will eventually be replaced. Well, not necessarily replaced, will not be the only reserve currency. And when that happens, it's going to radically change the lifestyle of the average American citizen. He said that back in 2005. I did not hear the message, which is why I want to make sure we're sounding the alarm with our audience now. Gold was going at $400 an ounce. We've seen gold go up to as close to $2,000 an ounce, $1,900 and some change. I think it was last year, about August-ish or so of last year. Could be off just a little bit on that time frame. It's back down just a little bit because there's this feeling that all is well in the U.S. There's this feeling that that unemployment is down. There's this feeling that, hey, housing is up again. Let me tell you, it's an illusion because it's all funny money. It's monopoly money. It's not real because it's not backed by anything. Okay, so what are some things that you should consider doing? Starting a currency conversion as you have additional cash resources. Start converting that into silver and gold. I'm more partial to silver. It's easier. If you don't have a lot of money, you can start buying an ounce or two of silver because silver's in the $20 or so range. Gold's in the $1,300 range per ounce. Now, in our system, Networkers for Wealth, we have a system that we highly recommend for a silver and gold conversion system, and it also includes collectible silver. and I'll just say this very quickly. If you had purchased a collectible silver coin each month from 1986 to 2012, a 26-year period, your collectible silver collection now would be worth over $610,000. Now, that would have been about $32,000 conversion. That's 312 months. Let's say if you were converting $100 a month. So about 31,200, let's call it 32,000 of paper money that you converted into collectible silver. Your collectible silver would be valued at about $610,000. What would your cash assets be if it had been sitting in a bank? Even if it was sitting in a mutual fund. Okay? So I want you to start considering that. We'll talk more about that as you follow us in our Networkers for Wealth portal. We talk extensively about that, and we've got a lot more content that's going to be coming that way. Another thing that you may want to consider doing is diversifying your paper assets, your cash assets, into other currencies. Okay? Don't have a whole lot of time. I'm over my time right now, but I want to apologize because I want to make sure you're awake, that you're sober. All right. So, for instance, if you've got, let's say you've got 100,000 U.S. dollars, okay? Well, if the U.S. dollar does go kaput, you're in trouble, right? Well, now obviously you need to take care of your monthly expenses, which is one of the reasons why we want to help you generate 4 full-time income streams, so that taking care of your monthly expenses, you can do that with cash. All right, you do that with cash, but now you've got cash that you can start converting into silver and gold, and silver and gold is a hedge against a falling dollar or falling funny money paper system, whether that funny money is euros, whether that funny money is pesos, whether that funny money is whatever Jamaican money is. If it's not backed by anything, it's still funny, okay? But another thing you want to consider doing is diversifying into different currencies. The currency market, what's called the foreign exchange market, is where you have currencies that trade against other currencies. So, for instance, the U.S. dollar trades against the Japanese yen. JPY is a Japanese yen. Okay, the U.S. dollar trades against the Canadian dollar. The Australian dollar trades against the U.S. dollar. So, relative to the Australian dollar, if the U.S. dollar went down, then the Australian dollar would increase in value. And so by having some of your cash assets or cash in a different currency, what that does is that helps so that if your main currency that you do business in is going down in value relative to another country's currency, well, then the value of your Australian currency is increasing, and that serves as a hedge against your falling U.S. dollar currency. Now, I'm saying U.S. dollar, but I would do this no matter what country or what system that you are in. Now, here's some countries that you might just want to take a look at that their economies are much stronger than the U.S. Singapore has an extremely strong economy. You might want to look at Australia. Australia has a fairly strong economy. You might want to look at, you might even want to consider, if you wanted to look at a European nation that's not in the Eurozone, the Swiss franc has performed very well relative to the U.S. dollar. Now, if you are able to open up some international banking, many times with an international banking account, you can hold money in different currencies. So if you're able to get an international banking account set up, and you fund that international banking account even with U.S. dollars, in many cases you can say, hey, can I have money sitting in British pounds? Can I have money sitting in Swiss francs? Can I have money sitting in Australian dollars or what have you, okay? So consider that as well. So now what we've done, if possible, you set up some international banking. Even with international banking, I would try to keep as little in my banking account. I just don't trust them. Look at what they did to Cyprus, okay? As possible. Personally, I much prefer going back to the way it used to be. I haven't used a credit card other than doing some online activities. I've not used a credit card offline since my exodus from the States. I live in an area where, cash is king. So I like that better. I don't want to keep a lot of money in the banks so that they can come and do a haircut. And then when I have money in banks, I want to diversify amongst other currencies. Now, those of you that are not in the U.S., let's say you're in Jamaica, let's say you're in South Africa, you actually have a distinct advantage. And I know that's not how it often plays in the media, often plays online, but you've got a distinct advantage because while your currency may follow the U.S. dollar, your currency would be considered in many cases like a floating currency. If the U.S. dollar is replaced, then you'll just follow whatever. If it's the Chinese, whatever that becomes alongside the U.S. dollar, you'll be able to follow that. In the country where I'm in, when I go to exchange money, I see what the exchange rate would be if I'm exchanging U.S. dollars, what the exchange rate would be if I was exchanging euros. So, for instance, I can hold money in a bank in the country that I'm living in their money. I can hold money in euros. I can hold money in U.S. dollars. So, doesn't it make sense that I not have all of my money in U.S. dollars when there is too much supply? Demand is not that demand has dried up, but other options are being talked about and discussed amongst other countries. Okay? Now, other things that I would have you consider doing. I would start having you to store non-perishables. Non-perishable food items and bottled water. Now, again, I'm not a fear monger, so I'm not the guy that come 2000 is going to say, hey, the world is coming to an end, and that's not me. But particularly if you're living in the U.S., there's dire times ahead. Dire times are coming. I want you to be prepared. If you're going, not everybody has the resources to move abroad. Not everybody wants to move abroad. So do some things to protect yourself. Right now, I'd be buying and storing up non-perishable food items. Because if the dollar, as it continues its descent, and we see prices continuing to increase, the day could come that a loaf of bread could be $20. So get non-perishable food items. Start storing those now. Start storing those. And what's the worst case? Hey, maybe I'm completely wrong. I hope I am. You won't go hungry. You won't go hungry. Start storing some bottled water. My buddy told me, he said, T. Lamont, this is the gentleman he's actually he's lived through two revolutions. I forget the other country he was living in. This gentleman has traveled to over 100 different countries, okay? He's been outside of North America. He's a Canadian-born parents. His mom lives in Florida, but he's actually lived outside of North America for the last 30 years. Had a fascinating early career. He was an underwater photographer. So, he would go in the South Pacific and he'd go diving and he would do the filming of all these exotic, things underwater. As a result, he's traveled extensively over 100 different countries, has not lived for any length of time in North America for the last 30 years. Canadian-born citizen, mom is in Florida, but he has lived in islands or South Pacific or what have you. Latin America, so on and so forth. He told me that he was in 2 revolutions, the last of which was in Argentina. And he says, T. Lamont, what causes revolutions is lack of food. If you keep the people fed, they're far less likely to riot. You keep them fed. What his concern is about the U.S. right now is as little as 30, as much as 40+% or more of the folks are on food assistance. What happens when the government says we can't assist as much or we will not assist anymore? Or in order to get your food assistance, you now must march to this drum music. Start storing non-perishable food items, bottled water. Instead of going out buying doodads, get some cans of stuff, non-perishable food items. And consider, this won't be for everyone. Not everybody's going to want to do this. Not everybody at this point can afford to do this, but consider options outside your native country. So my dear buddy, Attorney Frank Buck, who's done some asset protection things for us in the past, a few years ago, he says, T. Lamont, you and Karen need to start traveling internationally. You need to start looking at places outside of the U.S. I'm not telling you to leave. I'm not telling you to move, but you need to start, just in case. And I said, Dr. Buck, Attorney Buck, this is all I know. This is my land. And I'm proud to be an American. I don't want to go. I've got small children. Well, they weren't small. My little girl is small. She's now 6. But at the time of this conversation, she's probably 3. And so I said, well, give me an idea of some places to go visit. And he rattled off a list: Belize, Honduras, Chile, Dominican Republic. He gave me a list of several countries to visit. And I started looking at some of these online. And I've got to tell you, when I started looking at some of these online, some of the things didn't seem favorable. It sounded like there was, oh man, it's not safe. And it sounds like you're going to be robbed at gunpoint at every turn. And health care is not good. And then we got outside of our borders. The first country we went to was Belize. And what we saw in Belize was amazing. We did see living conditions that weren't what we were used to in the States. We saw people living in houses that, we would frown upon in the States. But you know what we saw that was very interesting? We didn't see anybody hungry. We didn't see anybody hungry. We didn't see anybody homeless. Now, some of the housing wasn't what I've been used to. We saw people happy. We went to this town, not the vacation part. We had a little vacation there, but we wanted to go and see where do some of the native Belizeans live and how do the native Belizeans live. And it blew us away. It wasn't this focus on material possessions, but the people seemed so happy. Without the 3,000 square foot home, without the Mercedes, without the BMW. And we started to think, have we missed something being caught up in such a materialistic culture? Again, I'm not sure. I want you to make a lot of money, but it's not for the shiny stuff. And we saw families. We went to Guatemala. We went to Antigua, Guatemala. Love that. Oh, gosh, I love Antigua, Guatemala. My gosh. Now, what I read online wasn't good. Would have you to believe that You're going to be kidnapped. They're going to steal your stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, we're walking the streets, Antigua, beautiful town, lovely people. Once again, you have segments of the population that we would consider very, very poor from Western standards. But I didn't see anybody hungry. I didn't see anybody homeless. I can go to any city in the U.S. with all that the U.S. has in Canada and find hungry, homeless people in the land of the free. We went down to this town square. As their custom, the weekend is a big deal. They go down to this public square, and they'll have music, and they'll have activities. And we saw, it blew me away, we saw four, in some cases, what appeared to be 4 generations of family. We saw great-grandparents, what appeared to be great-grandparents, with the grandparents, with the parents, with the kids. And what we also noticed is that we didn't see the kids all tied up with all the electronic gadgetry. We saw them having real conversations. They weren't texting. They were talking to grandma, a great-grandma. They were talking to granddad, a great-granddad. And that's what we started wondering, Karen and I, in our pursuit of all the material stuff, because that's what we've been trained on. Man, look at what we've been sold, this bill of goods we've been sold. But the reality was, we walked through that town late at night. We never felt threatened. We never felt like our lives were in danger or somebody was going to come. Now, would we still take the same precautions that we would take? No, I'm not going to leave. My wife didn't leave a purse around. I didn't leave my wallet around. But we never felt threatened. We went to Chile. We went to the Dominican Republic. We'll be going to Ecuador. And what we've seen in each country, ladies and gentlemen, every time I left the U.S., I did not want to return. Because what I saw family. I saw what was more important. Do I want you to make money? Do I want you to make a lot of money? Yes. But for me, it's more about you and I making money to protect our families. Consider options. If you're going to take a vacation, go outside the country. And then spend a couple days outside of the vacation part and see how the real people live. Spend some time there. By the way, in a lot of these countries, some of you are at retirement or getting close to retirement. In a lot of these type of countries, your dollars can go much further. In Ecuador, your dollar goes much further. In Guatemala, your dollar could go much further. In the Dominican, some things are a little bit more expensive, but I can tell you, for instance, healthcare in some of those countries, very inexpensive. Very inexpensive. And I'm talking quality care. Very quality care. When we were in the Dominican, we were told in the town that we visited that they had just buried a young lady who was 119. But there was also a young lady in the town who was still living that was 120. We got a chance. We didn't meet her, but we got a chance to see her. Give me a moment. I've got to change my phone. It sounds like this battery's about to die on me. Bear with us. Queen, can you hear me okay? Can you guys still hear me? Okay, good. Okay. So, Queen, we were in the Dominican, and we saw this lady, 120. My grandmother closed her eyes at 101, and that was spectacular, 101. We saw the lady, 120. She still does her own laundry, Queen. 120. Consider options outside your native country, okay? And whether you do that or not, consider if you want to invest, once you start developing these resources, if you want to make a very worthwhile investment, consider investing in agricultural property. Whether you're in the U.S. or some other, what they would call a developed nation, or whether you're in other countries that maybe aren't considered as developed. Consider investing in, as you have the resources, in some agricultural property. One of the things we were looking for, Queen, when we were looking for a place outside of, was a place that we didn't want to stay in the touristy areas. They're more expensive in the touristy areas where you're going to have some of the crime and those types of things. When we went to Belize, when we went to Guatemala, when we went to Dominican, when we went to Chile, we wanted to look at some of the agricultural areas and some of the rural areas. Okay, and the thinking was, if we're in an area that's agricultural, and in many of those lands they're not, their soils are still rich with minerals. For instance, in the Dominican, things grow like wildfire. Same thing in Belize. Same things in Guatemala. And so, Queen, we saw people in Guatemala, for instance, we saw folks that we perceived to be in their 80s and 90s, but they didn't walk around like they were 80 or 90. They weren't creaking around. But you want to have, you want to be in a place, whether you live there or whether you have some type of financial interest in something, where you know you're going to have food. Because as my buddy says, it's the lack of food that starts riots. He said what happened in Argentina was when the currency was debased, all the food got gone. And then people couldn't afford to buy more food. And that's when the riots took place. Okay? So consider agricultural property. So if you go and you visit other nations, don't be afraid to make some changes, to make some modifications. We've made some major modifications. In the town that we're in, there is no mall. My wife has had to make that modification. Did she want to make that modification? No, but we moved here for the express, one of the reasons, for the express reasons, is we knew it was agricultural. We knew that food is not going to be a problem. Queen, I remember the first time we were on the road, and there was this guy that came out waving this red flag, and I'm thinking, what's this red flag about? Well, as soon as he did that, there was this herd of cattle that were behind him, and so they were moving cattle from one field to the other. And so we had to wait. We had to wait about 10 or 15 minutes. But instead of me getting irritated, as I probably would have done in the States, I got to go, I looked at that and I said, man, look at all that beef. Look at all that food. Look at all that food. Never going to grow hungry. Never going to go hungry. Where I am, Queen, you go outside, there's food. Now, it may not be a Big Mac. It may not be all that processed stuff, which it doesn't need to be. But, Queen, so consider these things as ways to protect your family. Tila Mine, I don't have the resources right now to start traveling internationally. And I certainly don't have the resources to move right now. I get that. I understand that. This is why I want us to build our business with an extreme sense of urgency. Now, real quick, I'm well past my time, but I will not apologize for it. For my folks that are already outside the U.S., because you live in Trinidad, you live in Jamaica, you live in South Africa, you don't live in the U.S., okay? Despite what it may come across in the media and the internet, I personally envy you. Because as I've traveled to some of these other countries, Queen, Guatemala, Belize, Dominican, Chile, if there was a major global economic collapse, a lot of those countries, while they would still be affected, it would not have the same impact. Let me give you an example, okay? So one of the adjustments I had to make when we made our hiatus, I'm used to, Queen, power. Utilities, lights are on all the time, right? So we wasted a lot in the U.S. You leave one room, you leave the light on. You get TVs on, you're not even watching it. All right? Well, what happens where I am is city power is on for most of the day. but you may have times when the city power goes out. Well, what a lot of folks have is they have a backup system, a battery system, so that in a lot of cases you don't even recognize, don't even know that the city power just went off. You know, you might see the lights flicker, and what happened was the city power went off, but then your generator kind of kicked in, so on and so forth. Well, Queen, when we moved, the house was newly built. We're renting it. We're not buying it. We wanted to get a sense of the area first, but we're renting it. And, of course, with a new house, you're going to have some new house hiccups. So what happened, Queen, early on, the first couple of weeks we were here, when the city power would go off, our battery power did not kick in. And, there were times where we were without power for a few hours for the day. Now, was that fun? No. But now, for that 2 weeks, we got used to it. Didn't like it, but we got used to it. So then we had 3 weeks where that didn't happen. You know, if the city power went out, our battery power kicked right in, no problem. Now, yesterday there was an accident, and city power went out, and again, most people's battery system kicked in. My neighbor's battery system kicked in. They had lights. We did not. But because we have already dealt with that, while it wasn't fun, guess what? It was okay. We were used to it. And so I started thinking, if there's a global economic collapse, my buddy who I've been talking about has lived through two revolutions. He actually lives in the town that I live in. And he told me, you know, when 2008 happened, he said, we didn't feel it at all. He said a lot of the folks here didn't even know about it. So I don't want you to be afraid to start looking outside of the box, okay? I don't want you to be afraid to start looking outside of the box. Okay, so as we round third here, and I really don't have time. We're way past our time. We really don't have time to get into questions and answers. We will have more of these type sessions. We might even have sessions that have nothing to do with us having done a preamble with an income opportunity. I want you prepared, whether you live in the U.S. or not. I want you prepared. I want you prepared. One of my multimillionaire mentors taught me this. He says, T. Lamont, you pray for the best, but you always prepare for the worst. That way, if the worst never happens, well, you're in great shape. But if the worst happens, you're not caught unprepared. Tremendous philosopher, they called him Solomon. Some people say that he was the wisest man to live. In one of his works, he penned, "Go to the ant, thou sluggard." Look at how the ant, when it's good times, when it's spring, when it's summer, how the ant stores up. Because the ant knows that fall and winter are coming. So that when fall and winter come, the ant's already prepared. Queen, I'll start the round third with this. One of the things that we've gotten used to, because we're in a fairly tropical environment, so Queen, I'm still wearing shorts and T-shirts and all that good stuff. And where I am, a lot of the folks don't have air conditioning. I'm actually in the hills, and we get a really nice breeze, really nice breeze. And in many cases, you don't even feel the need for air conditioning. But what a lot of people will do is they'll have their windows open, or they'll open up their front door and their back door and then allow the breeze to come through. All right, well, the thing is, when that happens, you might get something that flies in your house. And again, I'm used to in Orlando, Florida, we were in air conditioning, you know, so we've got an outdoor patio that leads to the house, so we like open up these glass doors, and I'm standing in the outside patio. What's interesting is, so we'll have these little flying things, particularly at night. If we have the light on an outside patio, it'll attract, you know, moths and what have you. And what's amazing is in the morning, we'll normally eat breakfast in the outside patio. And almost invariably, almost every day, there's a moth that's died. And there's a whole bunch of ants small, itty bitty ants that are taking this moth. In one case, we saw them take the moth apart. I'm sorry if you're eating, because it was so much bigger than the ants. They deassembled the moth, and then you see them walk in a row, taking them to wherever they're taking them. It's amazing to me. So Solomon said, while things are good, store up, prepare. It's not good for all of you right now. That should change as you start to apply the things we've begun to teach with tonight's segment, what you'll learn as you come into DS Domination and go through the training there. I want you to commit to no less than 2 hours a day, 5 days a week on your listing business, at least until that listing business is generating a full-time income for you. Will you have a hurdle or two? Yes. Will there be some frustrations? Yes. Hopefully, we've stoked your why this evening. When your why is big enough, the hows will not matter. You will do whatever it takes to make sure that you feed your why and that you get closer to your why. When your why is big enough, the hows do not matter. If your why is not big enough, the hows don't matter. Doesn't matter what I teach you, doesn't matter what any guru teaches you. You won't apply it if your why is not big enough. Work on yourself at least 30 minutes a day, listening to good material, reading good material, watching good material that feeds you. It could be personal development. It could be spiritual empowerment or what have you. Build your business with fervor and urgency. Keep as little in the banks as possible. We can't trust these rascals out there, okay? Look at doing some international banking. Even if you're not in the U.S., if you're in Jamaica, look at banking outside of Jamaica. You don't want all of your financial resources in the country where you reside. Start a currency conversion. We talk a lot more about this in our Networkers for Wealth system. We endorse a particular currency conversion system that's also tied to a network marketing opportunity. So it allows you to not only convert to silver and gold and even collectible silver, but allows you to build another income stream there as well. Diversify your paper assets into other currencies. You can go and you can get a foreign exchange account. Just go look up Forex. You can get a foreign exchange account. You can fund that account with your country's currency, and then you can buy other currencies. So, for instance, if you're a U.S. citizen, you get a foreign exchange account, and then maybe you buy the Australian dollar. If you buy the Australian dollar, you'd be selling the U.S. dollar. Well, what you're doing there is you're basically giving yourself a hedge. If the U.S. dollar goes down relative to the Australian dollar goes up. And so where you may have lost some power on the U.S. dollar, you've gained some power with the Australian dollar. Well, what does that do for me if I'm not in Australia? Well, then you could sell that position at a rate higher than what you purchased that position, and then get the U.S. dollar cash to go and buy stuff. But that allows you to diversify. Again, that was a higher level strategy that maybe some of you that didn't quite pick up. Don't worry about it. You'll start learning those things as you follow us. And again, store non-perishable food items and bottled water. Even if you cannot, start traveling right now. When my wife and I were first told, hey, you need to start traveling, we were coming off of a very tumultuous business failure. We were part owners of a network marketing company that didn't make it. We lost virtually everything. We were part of that company from 2006 to 2008, and we virtually lost everything. We lost everything. We had amassed some nice real estate holdings. We sold those holdings to generate cash to help keep the company afloat. The company didn't make it. We lost everything. We were not in the financial position to start traveling outside of the U.S. So what we did is we started going online, and we started getting as much information about other countries as we possibly could, so that when we had the resources, instead of just taking a week vacation here, we said, hey, let's go and let's check out Belize. Let's go and let's check out Guatemala. Let's go and let's check out this country and that country, okay? And then consider agricultural property. Consider agricultural property. One last thing. that would be very helpful. Learn another language. So, for instance, if you are an English speaker, maybe you say, hey, let me learn Spanish. Let me start on that now. There's a great site. I think it's 123 Teach Me. This is a free site. They offer some great tutorials there. Great place to start picking up Spanish, for instance. If you're an English speaker and you also speak Spanish, or at least can have a conversation in Spanish, you just open up the world to you. There's so many places you can now go. If you are a Spanish speaker and now you learn English, you just open up so many more parts of the world to you. We knew that our moving outside the U.S., moving to another English-speaking country, we may not get the things that we were moving for. We may not be able to get the agricultural land. We may not be able to get our dollar to stretch longer and what have you. And so we made the decision that we were going to look at Spanish-speaking countries. We felt like for us, that kept us in the Western Hemisphere, that kept us just a few hours flight to see my parents. Unfortunately, my wife's parents are no longer with us, but to see family, so on and so forth. And so I would not wait. I would start, with an online tutorial like 123 Teach Me, or there's several, I forget the one that's real popular, where you can learn Russian and you can learn Spanish and you can learn French and so on and so forth. My wife and I met with a gentleman today. The gentleman speaks 8 languages, and as we've traveled just a little bit internationally, it's amazing how so many countries. We met a young lady the other day from Aruba, I believe it is, and she said in her schooling, they're taught 3 languages. So when she graduated schooling, I forget what they call one of the native tongues there in Aruba, but they also learned English, and I believe it was Dutch. Okay, so she speaks fluent English, she speaks fluent Dutch, and whatever the native tongue of that region happens to be. And as I've met folks around the globe, a lot of folks around the globe actually speak multiple languages. They're taught that from a youth in their schooling. One of my great mentors, never met him, Jim Rohn. That's a great personal development mentor, by the way, for you to consider. You can go to YouTube and type in Jim Rohn. You'll get some phenomenal training from him. One of the things he said before he passed on, unfortunately, in 2009, he said, in order to compete in this century, he did this talk maybe the beginning. Whoops.
Welcome to GoToWebinar, webinars made easy.
Queen, can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Everybody else can hear you too.
Okay, my phone went out, and
Yeah.
so I guess they're telling me that the webinar is it's time to round third.
It's time, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Jim Rohn. Go to Jim Rohn, ladies and gentlemen. One of the things that he said was learn another language. And if you feel like you're too old to learn another language, give it a gift to your children and your grandchildren. My children are learning Spanish. They're actually in an international school where they're taught in both English and Spanish. They're immersed. The folks that are around us all speak Spanish. And we don't know a lot of Spanish just yet. We're taking Spanish classes, and our Spanish has really improved greatly in the past few weeks. But I still can't go out and have a great conversation other than el baño, the bathroom, or la cuenta, por favor, the check, please. Dos botellas de agua, 2 bottles of water. But I can tell you that when you, if you do move abroad, or if you are abroad, if you are making a concerted effort, what I don't want you to do is go to a place or consider going to a place and you try to recreate where you're coming from. You try to recreate America in Ecuador. You're trying to recreate America in Chile, as an example. There's a reason why I left the U.S. I'm not trying to recreate it.
Exactly.
Do I love the U.S.? Yes.
Yeah.
Did I, on my own volition, when I had just gotten up and left? No. That's all I knew. When I stepped outside, though, I actually forget all the other stuff we've talked about, the financial concerns I have. I actually fell in love with the way life is lived in other parts of the world. Far less stressful, Queen. Far more time with family. The things that really matter. Ladies and gentlemen, we thank you for being on tonight's webinar. We love each and every one of you.